Okay, so now we're going to combine stuff. So again, there are doubts. Maybe the standardization is good or bad. There may be doubts about specification. But let's say we've done the best we can. There's always going to be some controversy on the margin. Now let's try to figure out what the bottom line estimate is. Let's say we have J studies, and the estimated treatment effect is beta hat J for each one. We've got a sample size of n sub J. The simplest case is the case where all the studies were generated by the same process. There's the same underlying beta, same sigma, but the different studies just have different sample sizes. So this would be the case, for instance, if you had a lab. So think about a lab experiment. It's kind of an easier case here. Imagine there was a lab experiment, and you ran the same lab 10 times, getting random draws of the population of whatever university sample you were getting, and sometimes you did it with 50, and sometimes you did it with 100 and whatnot. Like, at the end of the day, what you really just want to do is pool all your data, right? And that's effectively what you would do if all the studies were generated by the same process. You'd effectively pool your data where, the average effect you'd get would just be the mean of your estimated effects just weighting by the sample size. But that's the same as pooling all the data here. So that's a kind of idealized case. A more general case and more realistic is where there is a different degree of variability in the estimate for some inherent reason. Maybe the measures are different from one data series rather than another. Maybe the populations are different. There's just more variability in outcomes. Or maybe you included different covariates, and that's going to affect how precise your estimates are. You have different access to different covariates. So now we're going to maintain the assumption that beta is the same, but now the data is being generated in a slightly different way. We're again going to be combining estimates and meta-analysis, these different beta hats, across studies with weights, some weights omega. And it's straightforward to show that the choice of omega, which minimizes the variance of the resulting estimator, this pooled beta tilde, is going to be, the weights are going to be inverse precision weights. The more precise the estimate is, the more weight it's going to get. The less precise the estimate is, the less weight it's going to get. And this is just the analog to the simple case where when you pool data, when you have lots of observations, you get more weight than when you have few observations. Well, this generalizes to precision weighting. Another approach to meta-analysis goes beyond the mean. And this is actually what a lot of meta-analyses do. So imagine instead of just having a beta hat, there's some sort of range of possible estimates. So, my best guess is my estimate of this individual study is here, but it's a pretty imprecisely estimated effect. So there's also some, possibility that the true effect lies way out over here. So each of these actually plots are distributions of predicted effects from different studies. One thing that folks do in meta-analysis is you can combine these effects and sort of see where there is mass across these different studies. So actually, in this case, this is actually the data that goes into the interpersonal violence case. There's a lot of studies with these small positive estimates. These are really precisely estimated studies, right? The range of estimates for these is very narrow. There's others that have larger effects that are quite imprecisely estimated. Out here, just like you can weight and then sum up the beta hats, you can weight and sum up these distributions to come up with a pooled distribution of effects. An even more general case allows the betas to differ. So when we're thinking about what I've shown you before, if there's the same beta and there's variation across studies, why could that be the case? If they have the same beta, it must be due to sampling variation. So, you have a limited sample, you have a limited sample, I have a limited sample, our betas differ. That's just because of various types of sampling variation, random variation. If betas are the same, then as we all get the same as we all grow in size, all of our 3 studies, and we get more and more, we should be getting closer and closer to the true beta, all of our estimates should be converging as well. So the fact that there are literatures, we have really precise estimates of effects that differ from each other suggests, it isn't just sampling variation. How much of the differences between our studies is due to sampling variation, like pure noise, like the disturbance term, and how much of it is inherent differences in what we're estimating? Because you did rainfall, I did temperature. You looked in India, you looked in Africa. Like maybe these effects are just different. So imagine that instead of assuming there's one beta, imagine the beta j's are distributed with some mean mu. We still care about mu. This is like the average effect. As long as we buy that there's some commonality here, mu is the average effect across these studies, even if they have some differences. And then tau is what governs the variability across the beta j's. So this is like, how much variance is there in your random effect or something like that. How meaningful is the random effect? So in this sort of, this kind of approach, which has this sort of hierarchical structure, where there's sort of a mean, this mean mu and some variability across studies, these are called hyperparameters. And it's kind of neat to carry out this kind of approach or to think of things in this light, because if we can quantify tau, we get a sense of how much variability. We can quantify variability across studies. We can quantify heterogeneity. So instead of you just saying, oh, there's too much heterogeneity to pool things, I can say, well, this is exactly how much heterogeneity there is across studies. And in estimation, I think the intuition is, as studies become more and more precise, you're less and less able to explain differences through sampling variation, and more of those differences get loaded onto tau. Whereas if you have lots of really imprecise estimates and small samples and whatnot, well, if you can account for a lot of the differences with sampling variation, there's really not much role for this sort of random effect, this study effect. Here are some of the meta-analysis results. This is the intergroup conflict results: civil war, rioting, insurgency, civil conflict, all those kinds of things. Red is temperature. These are temperature studies. The blue ones are rainfall shortfalls. The green ones are rainfall deviations. We came up with this amazing, this was all Sol, I think. This was incredible color coding. And so let me just explain what's going on. Each of these is the estimate from a different study. The y-axis is the change in percent per 1 standard deviation change in climate. So this is our normalized effect. We have the 0 line here. You can see almost all of these estimates are above 0. All the red ones are above 0. That was the temperature result from before. And the whiskers here are the 95% confidence intervals. So some of these estimates are really precise. This Hidalgo et al. On land invasions in Brazil has tons of local data and lots of variability in weather and really precise estimates. Some of these are really imprecise. Like the one all the way here on the left is a conflict study, and with confidence intervals of 40% or something like that. So there's a lot of variability there. And we present a couple of different ways to understand these results. So the first thing we present is the median effect, which is this dashed line here. The median effect is across all these studies. What is the percent change per 1 standard deviation shock in climate? That's about 13%. That is, my friends, is a very big shock. A 2 standard deviation climate shock happens once every once every few years or something, once every 5 years or 8 years or whatever it is, right? And so this is a big increase in conflict risk. We also have the mean estimate here. Now, the mean estimate comes from the meta-analysis. The mean estimate comes from the inverse probability weighted meta-analysis, like the straight-up standard meta-analysis. And those results are presented over here in solid lines. So for the intergroup studies, we don't have that bimodality we had in the interpersonal violence. This white circle here is the average effect from the meta-analysis with the resulting confidence interval, 95% confidence interval. So you can see, taking these couple dozen studies together, there's an average effect of 11% per 1 standard deviation shock, and it's very significant, right? This is far away from 0. The dashed line here is the Bayesian hierarchical approach, allowing for heterogeneity across studies. And it yields actually a very similar relationship here. Okay, then we just looked at the temperature studies. So, some of the potential critiques of this approach is, you're mixing temperature, rainfall, all kinds of things. Temperature is really easy to measure. A lot of the studies have temperature. From the point of view of future climate change, we actually understand the future consequences for temperature than many other climatic variables. Like almost all the climate models predict temperature is going to increase 2 or 3 degrees Celsius at least, whereas the effects on, say, rainfall patterns are much less certain. In some places, rainfall will increase, in some it'll decrease, in some there'll be more variability. So in thinking about the future, temperature is really natural to focus on. So we did the same thing for the temperature studies, and here we get slightly larger effects. Also, significant and, significantly different than 0, and slightly larger effects for temperature. Okay, these are the interpersonal violence studies, and you can see immediately why there are these two, this bimodality. There's a few studies here that are U.S. crime studies using decades worth of data at the county level for 3,000 counties in the U.S., and they have these incredibly precise estimated effects. And they have somewhat different effects. So actually the average effect in the simple meta-analysis lies in between these two modes. So these are again the sort of distribution-weighted estimate, and then this is the simple average from the meta-analysis. Then there's a bunch of studies from low-income countries that have much less precisely estimated effects. So let me just get to publication bias. So we're going to regress log of the t-stat and log of the degrees of freedom and try to get a sense of what that slope looks like. That slope should be 1. If the slope is 0 or negative, then we're really concerned. The overall slope here, if we run the regression of log t-stat on log degrees of freedom, is 0.32. It's positive, it's significant, but it's not 1. And it's not 1 in part because, again, there is some clustering of studies. You can kind of visually see some clustering of studies at t-stat of 2. So there's probably some publication bias in this literature. Now, figuring out how close we need to get to 1 to convince ourselves there's no publication bias, I don't know. But the other thing that comes out is in some of the rainfall studies, there's an even weaker slope. And actually a bunch of the, I think the triangles are the temperature studies and the circles are the non-temperature studies. So in these sort of rainfall studies, the slope is lower, there's a lot of clustering around 2. In the temperature studies, less so. So the slope is steeper for the temperature studies. And you just see lots of well-powered studies with big samples and big t-statistics over here.